Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us this morning. There are people arriving all the time at the moment. So I'm Lisa, and I'm responsible for setting up our events at Torchbox. And I'm delighted that today we're actually hosting this event in partnership with Scroll UK. So Scroll are a digital content consultancy, and they offer services primarily to the public sector and non-profit sector. And they work independently, but they also work with tech partners like Torchbox. And so we've partnered on projects for organisations like Buckinghamshire Council and the Department for International Trade. And Scroll also have a network of associates, otherwise known as Scrollies. And we're lucky to have a bona fide Scrollie speaking on our session today. And I'd also like to say a quick hello to Hetty, who is the founder of Scroll, and she's joining as an attendee. This is a webinar, so you can see us, but we can't see you at the moment. So please do use the chat for any general discussions. But if you have a specific question, if you could use the Q&A feature, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen, that really helps us keep track of the questions that have been answered or unanswered. We might be able to ask some during the session. So if you could say who your question's for, if it's for Danny or Jen. If we don't get through them in the session, we're going to have 10 to 15 minutes at the end where we'll just have a Q&A session. I think that's about it. So on that note, I will hand back over to Phil.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Yeah, echoing what Lisa said, welcome everyone who's joining. It's great to see so many of you today on the webinar today, or rather sort of feel your presence from what is all around the world by the looks of the list of people attending. So my name's Phil McMinn. I am the Director of Digital Marketing at Torchbox. A bit about Torchbox, for those of you who don't know who we are a full service digital agency. We build websites for non-profits and public sector orgs and universities, anyone who is operating in a socially progressive space. So full service to us means front and back end development, it means design, it means UX and digital marketing, under which sit our SEO team. And really it's these last two areas of work, so user experience and SEO, that are the fields that we're really concerned with today. On the one hand, with user experience, it's the language of user journey, user need, user story, job story, and task completion. And on the other, we're talking about keyword research and rankings and featured snippets and search engine results pages. And today's webinar really is about exploring the sort of intersection between those two areas or those two disciplines, and helping us think about how we design content that works not just for users when they're on that content or on that page, but the step before that when they're looking for that content. So Torchbox provides SEO. Well, the biggest organisation that we work with in that field is the main NHS website, www.nhs.uk, and we're going to have tons of examples from our work there today. And in the case of that website, 90% of the traffic that arrives on that site starts with an organic search, which is just, for me, it's always been like eye-wateringly high, and it never fails to amaze me just how important organic search is to that website. So clearly, in the case of that website, content has to be built to be found, but it also has to be built in such a way so that when it is found and the user is on that page, it's meeting the user needs. So for that website, it's going to be largely getting the user to the action that they need to take as quickly as possible, drinking water, or if it's more serious, calling 999. And I wonder whether one need is ever more important than the other, or whether one should ever take one approach to designing websites or building content and designing content should ever take precedent over the other. And I don't think that's a particularly, from my experience, easy question to answer or straightforward question to answer. But I hope that today we'll go some way to providing some guidance on how we begin to do that, or how you can do that for your organisation, and really get to the root of how these two disciplines can work in such a way that ultimately serves the user best. So that's enough from me. On to our main speakers today. So firstly, we're really honoured to have Danny Chadburn on the webinar today, who is a content designer and aforementioned Scrollie. Danny, welcome.
Morning, thank you, Phil. Yeah, much appreciated for inviting me along today. Yes, subject very close to my heart. Just a little bit of background about me. So yeah, as Phil mentioned, I'm lucky enough to be a Scrollie. Worked on government projects for the last couple of years. Primarily Brexit last year and coronavirus this year. So yeah, lots of headline grabbing frontline stuff. yeah, prior to that, I've been head of content at a couple of SEO agencies, so I've got a little bit of background in SEO, although I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination. I've worked in-house with charities, so yeah, I have a relatively eclectic digital career. So yeah, hopefully some interesting insight to impart.
Great, thanks, Danny. And we have Jenny Hearn from Torchbox here. Hello, Jenny. What is your specialist subject?
Hi, Phil. Yeah, I feel like I'm on Mastermind at the moment. Hi, I'm Jenny. I'm an SEO analyst at Torchbox. So I've been working in SEO for more than 6 years, but before that, I've come from a copywriting and content writing background myself. So I was an editor and proofreader and copywriter. And like many content designers, I started out by working on a range of projects, so writing blogs for a women's health website, SEO copywriting, home improvement guides, and now I work with a range of charities, non-profits and public sector clients at Torchbox. So I work on the NHS website, some gov.uk sites like Buckinghamshire Council and Children's Commissioner, and with organisations such as the British Medical Association and Greenpeace as well.
Great,
so, yeah,
thank you.
Nice to meet you.
All right, so we're going to start, before we get on with conversation, with a quick poll. I think Lisa's going to launch that now. And really, we love polls. No webinar is complete without a poll. You should all be able to see that. And really, this is just to get a feel from us. It's the kind of, whether you have people in-house working on this stuff, whether you have people who are talking to each other and teams talking to each other, and looking really at how SEO and content design are working together at your organisation. There's a real range of organisations on this call, so it's going to be really interesting to see what the kind of levels of engagement are and happiness, I suppose, with how those two teams are working. Certainly from my experience in the non-profit space in which I predominantly work, it's there is a lack of resource in-house for SEO. It tends to be the area that's maybe not focused on, which, when you think about talking about 90% of the traffic coming from that source is always amazes me. So it'll be interesting to see whether everyone on this call has SEO resource and all of the teams are talking perfectly to each other, in which case we might just have to get our coats. But how are we doing on the
50-50 at the moment?
50-50, wow.
Yeah.
All right.
It's sad that hosts and panelists can't vote, because I'd really love a poll as well.
I think I can let you vote, I just haven't. I chose not to. I will next time. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now because that was over a minute.
Great.
And share the results. So it is.
Wow.
Yeah. 50-50.
Responsible is always an interesting word. It's you can be in charge of it, but not responsible.
Good point.
That's really interesting results. Okay, well, hopefully there'll be plenty of conversation at the end. As I say, we'll make sure we try and leave as much time as possible for questions and conversation. So let's begin then. So I wanted to really start at the beginning and have a look at some of the broader challenges that are faced in this space. I thought a good place to start would be to sort of talk to you individually about your experiences. So Danny, as a content designer, what role does SEO play in your job?
Not as much as it should is the simple answer. I'm speaking very much on a kind of .gov.uk stance at the moment, because that's where my head's been at the last couple of years. It's kind of a lot of amateur sleuthing rather than any kind of defined part of the process. Where there is SEO input and resource, it's generally kind of bundled into a performance analyst role, which means that it becomes part of the kind of post-match rather than the pre-match. We look at how pages are doing in search, but don't necessarily look at search in order to inform how they should be doing before they get published. So, I'm yet to see an SEO person within a government department that I've worked in. And to be honest, I think there's a general complacency around search. You kind of mentioned 90% for NHS. I've seen somewhere between 60 and 90% on most of the sites that I've been involved with. Yeah, no, I mean, it's a bit of a shame, you know, there's kind of no excuses for not understanding or not incorporating SEO into what you do as a content designer. It's kind of like, you know, knowing how to drive a car but not knowing how to put the petrol in, you know, because it is so fundamental to getting it going and getting it seen and getting it visible that, you know, it's a shame that it is kind of on the individual content designer's head to take an interest in that topic rather than it being, you know, a set part of the process. So, for example, recent discussions we've been having around kind of remote education and remote learning stuff at DFE, there's a kind of very clear SEO versus policy divide in that area. Same with local lockdown, local outbreak. Those two terms are kind of, you know, very you know, pertinent to kind of what's going on today. And yeah, same with EU exit and Brexit. For a long time, EU exit was the internal de facto term that was used by government, and gov.uk didn't rank for the term Brexit until Boris Johnson got elected and made a kind of wholesale sweep to get that as the, you know, the front page news term that everybody else was using anyway. Yeah, government was very much playing catch up in that area, and I think that must happen in multiple instances across the board.
I think that's really interesting that you say you've yet to see someone in-house, you know, who takes, well, whose responsibility it is. I think that's definitely the case in the non-profit spaces. It's almost overwhelmingly true that there is no one dedicated to SEO in-house, but there will always be a kind of social media officer or equivalent, despite the percentage of traffic being completely out, you know, weighed in favour of SEO. Jenny, conversely, tell us a bit about, you know, your work as an SEO and the role that content design plays in your day-to-day job.
So for me, my standpoint is like quite simply, without content, search engines wouldn't exist. So people use search engines to find content and often click through to the website to read more. And in many cases, like you said before, Phil, organic traffic is the biggest channel bringing users to the site. So 90% for the NHS, Danny, you said sort of 60 to 90% for websites that you've been working on. And so content design, from the words on the page to subheadings, the ordering of text and grouping of ideas, all those different design elements, they have a huge impact on how content is displayed and ranked in search results. So in that way, like SEO and content design are inextricably linked. And it's interesting that you were saying, Danny, about it's a shame that it's become, you know, almost like a content designer's responsibility, or they have to take an interest in it in order for SEO to be successful on the site. And I think with the organisations I've worked with, there are completely different perceptions of SEO. So some are completely bought in and engaged. Others are maybe a bit uncomfortable with the idea of like bringing in another factor to consider. You know, when you have things like UX leading the way and accessibility, SEO seems to be like just another thing that has to be part of the mix and maybe not as important as the user and user-centered design. And in some cases, SEO is actually a dirty word. And so in my day-to-day work, I work with organisations to try and bring SEO best practices into what people are doing, but also try and establish a good name for SEO within what they're doing. And as an example, working with the NHS, like we've gone on a journey together from SEO being acceptable as long as it's not compromising user needs, to recognizing that finding content in search is one of their primary user needs. And that's now how we talk about it. So as SEOs, our job is to support content designers in meeting those user needs for the journey from the search engine results pages through to the page. So that's how I've started to really explain how SEO is valid and valuable and can bring value to what content designers do.
I think that's a great point, saying SEO is user need. That for me that's a really important point.
Yeah, and it's almost, it should be part of the user researcher's role as well as the content designers. There's user research labs within the kind of central government digital service, and a huge amount of time and investment and energy is put into speaking to individual users and finding out their needs. But SEO offers that access to users en masse that individual users just can't get on scale.
Yeah, and I've actually found that I think so. Working with the NHS, when we came on board, we started working with the content designers on page SEO, ways to improve the way that they were designing content for search. But quite quickly we realised that, like you're saying, it's SEO can work with all the different departments, so you can work with all the different roles like user researchers, and the most successful kind of products and services are where SEO is kind of brought into the mix as well, and we talk to everybody within that team, not just content designers, like at the later stages of a project.
We've actually got quite a good question from Rachel, who said, why do you think the organisations you mentioned have been so slow to accept SEO?
I would say, well, SEO has a bad rep. It's seen as the kind of snake oil salesman kind of world. It's, very, very much not true when you get to grips with it. But I would guess because it's never needed to be acted upon, primarily because as a non-commercial organisation, you're not necessarily judged by traffic conversion rates and things like that. You're seen as long as you're presenting information and people are kind of seeing it, that's a good thing. And that's always kind of come not by accident, but just by the general authority that a gov domain has. So they don't need to go chasing traffic. They don't need to try and kind of refine their site in order to hit certain keywords. They just do so kind of by osmosis. But then they're not kind of held to account by that traffic coming in, having high bounce rates or not converting to sales. So there's no KPI behind it, and therefore there's no reason to put resources into it.
I think it's really interesting. You said the kind of words that I've heard. I think, Phil, you've heard these before as well, but the idea that, we don't want to chase traffic. Like SEO is seen as, sometimes it's seen as like a marketing channel, as in our job is just to bring more people to the site. Doesn't matter who they are, but we're like measuring an increase in rankings and visibility and click through to the site, and then tick, that's our job done. And I think that is it's still how some like you were saying, commercial SEO does work today, but I don't see that as good SEO, because if you're just thinking about bringing users to the site, then you're not thinking about necessarily bringing the right users to the site. So I think there's a balance to be struck, but I think that SEO has that bad reputation from like bad spammy SEO practices like 10 years ago, plus people thinking that it's just about bringing more users to the site. But actually I think there's a lot more that SEO can actually offer in terms of getting your content and your message out there.
And we'll come on to some of those ways, I think, in a bit around kind of how we change minds internally and how we kind of get buy-in. Let's move on. So, Danny, what happens when the teams who are responsible for content creation and content design don't talk to the teams that are responsible for SEO?
I think there's probably three consequences of that. The first one's the worst one, like people not finding your content at all. Just especially the amount of time and effort it can take to get something done and live, put it out, and it just gets lost in the ether because you haven't necessarily targeted it to a user need or an SEO based need. Second thing is finding too much content. So you know, a lot of silos operate within, you know, businesses, big, small, you know, commercial, non-commercial, whatever, and those teams working on their own thing often create very, very similar content without the kind of umbrella of an SEO checking that, you know, pages aren't conflicting or you know, cannibalizing kind of search results. You can often end up with too much choice for the user and a confusing user journey. So for example, last year, working on Brexit, there was lots of content around exporting to various countries pre-Brexit, exporting to various countries post-Brexit, general guides about exporting to various countries, and you know, a small manufacturer in the UK wanting to know this information would be you know, faced with very, very complicated search results without them necessarily, you know, understanding where it is that, you know, you were trying to direct them for the most, you know, pertinent information at that time. The third issue is kind of finding the wrong content or getting kind of, you know, sent down a bit of a rabbit hole that you didn't intend to jump down. So currently I'm working on a project where we're delivering free laptops to disadvantaged children across the UK through Department for Education. You know, it's incredibly kind of you know, valuable thing, you know, giving remote education to kids who didn't necessarily have it before. But it comes with complications. So we're ranking for over 500 key terms currently for free laptops for children, school laptops, student laptops. You know, tons and tons of traffic, but are we, you know, getting the right content to the right users? You know, I want a free laptop. It'd be lovely to have one, but this content isn't for me. So, you know, appearing number one for such valuable high traffic terms because we haven't necessarily considered or consulted the kind of SEO side of things, it's not bad, but it's not great.
It's really interesting. So let's just talk a little bit about kind of the word tension. So like at every stage of planning and thinking about this event, I've sort of been told off for using the word tension. Even the sort of, I had verses in the original title for this webinar and that had to go. But, you know, the reality is there is tension between these two disciplines and often between teams internally about what should kind of take precedent. And I wanted, again, Danny, for you here, a question is if you can think of an example where SEO should come first or it should win out, or, you know, does SEO ever have to come first in your work?
In the day-to-day, probably it sits nearer the bottom of the kind of priority list. But in kind of big IA restructure projects, it's, you know, it flips and should come very, very much near the top. You know, it's especially for, you know, redesign existing services that already have a relatively decent SEO kind of foothold. There's a lot of work that can be done by designers and UX specialists and whatever that can actually have, you know, negative impacts when it comes to SEO. So I used to work on a website called patient.info, had a million visitors a day, was kind of WebMD for the UK, a kind of commercial version of the NHS. And you can imagine there's a humongous taxonomy of you know, every condition that you can imagine, every medicine that you can imagine. And, you know, organising that information can kind of only come from a medical knowledge, but also a kind of search data point of view. You know, do we group stuff by condition type? Do we group stuff by body type? You know, and delivering that information so spiders can get into it and understand it and comprehend it is difficult. What search can't do, and where it can only kind of take you up to a certain point, is actually define what the user intent is when they're kind of typing in that search term. So for example, coming to the website, you might get a mother looking at rashes, maybe for her kid, for herself, for her, you know, elderly parent. Yeah, it might be a doctor who's showing, you know, a patient on the screen during a consultation. It might be a doctor doing some kind of medical research on, you know, epidemiology, you know, touching up on their kind of skills. So search can give you the information, but what it can't do is kind of take you the step beyond that and explain what the user's current kind of thinking is, and that's obviously where content design then needs to take that one step forward onto the page and spell it out in detail.
Jenny, how about you? When does SEO come first?
Well, this is what I was gonna kind of jump in on, because I think that I agree with what Danny says to a certain extent, and I do think that SEO doesn't give you the absolute finished product and polished kind of understanding of what users want, and that is why kind of like user researchers and content designers, that's their job, to kind of understand and then convey that. But I think that you can actually tell a lot about users' concerns by what they Google, and you know, people use Google as their confidants. People search their most intimate searches, especially around health, any burning questions they feel like they can't ask anyone else, and especially when they feel like they can't talk to anyone else. So I've done keyword research for Samaritans, for example, and like you can actually see like quite a lot of very frank user like searches that people have actually Googled. So I think that that search data and doing search query analysis can give you like a huge amount of information about your users and their needs. And so with the NHS, we're currently doing this really interesting piece of work, search query analysis, to understand what users' concerns are around coronavirus, because you know, the news is changing all the time. They don't necessarily have time to do big user research projects and user labs and things like that. So we're actually kind of mining search data to try and understand how people feel about things like test and trace, lockdown easing, using a variety of different kind of SEO keyword research methods. So we've found, for example, like quantified the most searched for conditions with coronavirus. So how many people are searching like coronavirus and chest pain versus coronavirus and tonsillitis, and that actually helps then user researchers and content designers make decisions about how to prioritize the content. It can help them see the bigger picture. So I think SEO, although it can't tell you exactly what people are thinking, it comes pretty close. And I think that we have some of the tools and research methodologies that would be really useful for content designers and user researchers when they're starting to think about what the users want as well. SEO can actually identify like unmet needs of the searcher as well.
So just taking that a step further and looking at a previous step, maybe even starting to think about the actual process or the validation for creating content. One strange experience I have is when I go to SEO conferences like Search Love or Brighton SEO, the audiences at these conferences are often, they're not in the non-profit space, and I always feel sort of like sticking out like a sore thumb because I work in the non-profit space. And the talk is very much focused around creating content specifically to rank. And there are lots of agencies out there who do that. And they commission agencies to create content to get backlinks and to rank for certain terms. But in the kind of space that we work in, I wondered if content should ever be created specifically in response to SEO data. Danny, what are your thoughts on that?
Specifically SEO data, I'd always say no. I think SEO data on its own and trying to hit that, it can damage you. It can damage your brand if you're doing it to jump on a bandwagon or to kind of pick up on a trend that isn't necessarily suited to the brand. I'm working on a project at the moment for a kind of high street name outdoors activities clothing company. They sell backpacks, jackets, all that kind of stuff that's been ripped out from underneath them in the current crisis. So they're spotting SEO trends and they're identifying growth in terms like work from home loungewear and the market for shorts versus trousers kind of flipped on its head, and their thinking at the moment is ploughing energy and effort into capitalizing on that market. And my thinking is fine for a short-term strategy, but how are you affecting your kind of long-term brand perception by bringing in new users and without the kind of authority or the product range to back it up? So it's all very well bringing in more users, but what does that do to your overall strategy?
How about in the non-profit space, Jenny? Do you think non-profits should ever create content for SEO?
Yes. So I'm again going to kind of disagree slightly with Danny here, that I don't think you should, so similar to Danny, I don't think you should create content just to get more traffic. But when we're looking at things like search volumes, the search volumes we're talking about is the average number of monthly searches for a certain keyword, and that big number represents the number of real users every month who searched for a topic or a question. So there are people out there, like, that's what they are searching for and are interested in. And so there's a project that I've been working on recently with Greenpeace UK, and they're an example of an organisation who have embraced this way of thinking. And they came to us knowing that they wanted to expand their reach and bring new users to the site. And so we've just completed a piece of work with them to create an SEO-led content strategy. And what that means is that we've focused on the idea of creating content around high volume search queries. And the idea isn't just to kind of get any traffic for things that people are vaguely interested in, like anything to do with the environment. But when we were doing the keyword research, we really looked at the keywords we chose to appeal to users who expressed an interest in the topics that Greenpeace care about. So it's not just, I think, the difference here is, rather than just as an SEO saying, here's a list of high volume keywords, go away and write content on it, there's a step in there, whether that is by the organisation or by the SEO, or hopefully together, kind of looking at those keywords in detail, trying to understand from those searches what information users are looking for, and then seeing if it aligns to the organisation's goals.
And I think that's why you need to bring in, and understand from both sides. It's a collaborative effort. The sending over a list of search terms and saying, here you go, this is what you should be ranking for. That then opens up the cool. Well, what do our marketing team need to focus on? What products are our sales team, needing to kind of get rid of this season? What does the legal team think about that? There's a lot of cans of worms that can be opened by certain suggestions, and I think it should always be a collaborative discussion rather than you're not going to fulfill your SEO potential unless you focus on these keywords. That's the pure difference between good SEO and bad SEO that sometimes gets the unwelcome reputation that it can have.
Yeah,
So
I think
on reputation, Jenny, a question back to you. You talked earlier about myths, and Danny's mentioned reputation here. And obviously, I think from my perspective, success in this space hinges on that, really, and getting around those blockers surely has to do with tackling some of those myths, right?
Yes. So we're talking about the myths like chasing traffic, and the idea that another one I've heard is that people don't want to necessarily write with SEO in mind because it's writing for machines, not users as well. And I think that this kind of these myths can come out of a misunderstanding of what SEO is trying to achieve, and it partly comes from this misunderstanding, and partly comes from like this bad SEO practices as well, that I think when SEOs are focused on just looking at sessions, that can be quite dangerous as well. But I think that SEO works best when like Danny was saying, conversations happen openly within the team. So it's not just like talking to one web editor or one content designer. It's talking about those decisions and giving all that information to the team to discuss, and also helping content designers understand the reasons behind those recommendations as well. So as SEOs, we have to help quantify the risk and opportunity. Things like search volume can actually help with that, because you're saying, well, here's the opportunity. You don't have to do it for organizational reasons, but you know, there are big numbers here. There are people searching for things that your organization also cares about, and also showing possible outcomes of the recommendations that you're making as well. So yeah, presenting the data, but also presenting screenshots and mock-ups of what those recommendations would look like as well. So I think
I'd always take, you know, fewer recommendations that are better explained over, you know, more opportunities without context.
yeah, and I think that's something where maybe this comes from SEOs working apart from content designers, but I think you might agree with me, Danny, but like the idea that SEO would come in and be like, right, here's our recommendations, do this or else, can be
yeah, I've seen
an
it
affront.
100 times. Seen it. Yeah, been on both ends of it. So it's yeah, it's not an uncommon practice, and yeah, it's confusing. You know, the further detached you are from, you know, the decision makers, the tougher it is to get that information across.
So I think that's one way of doing it, but also this kind of misunderstanding. Another way of changing that is through education as well. So I take it upon myself with what the way that I work with clients to not just give the recommendations, but also kind of educate at the same time, because I know that those recommendations aren't going to be implemented if there's not a strong enough reason to have them implemented. And like you were saying, Danny, if the decision maker isn't the person you're talking to as well, you have to give them the information they need to be able to explain it again. And so the way that I've been working with the NHS is that before coronavirus, I was kind of going down to the offices in London once a month and sitting in on the high table in the middle of the office and just being visible. So anyone with any ad hoc questions could come over and ask me questions about SEO, or even just being there. It would be almost like a reminder that, oh, Jenny's there, like I can ask her this SEO question that's related to a product or a service I'm designing as well. And I think that has been the biggest factor in having SEO like trusted and accepted and really start to be used.
So just talk a bit more about the NHS, Jenny. When does SEO come into the content design process at that organisation?
So I work with content designers, and that's how, like, when we started looking at how the SEO recommendations could help with content design as well. And I think through working with the NHS, there's kind of like 3 key stages when content designers should be thinking about SEO and do think about SEO. So the first is I get a lot of questions about understanding how the design of a page is interpreted by Google. So why does my content look or behave a certain way in search? And we help to troubleshoot like why the wrong page might be appearing in the search results, why competitors are appearing in a featured snippet box rather than your result as well. And the second one is providing those real life user search queries to help content designers mirror the user's language as well. And the third is kind of projecting the impact of adding or removing content. So if they're planning on making any big changes to a page or a section, like turning a single page into multiple pages, or whether or not to have content on hub pages. That's something where you know, if they want to know what the impact of that is going to be on their current organic performance, that's where we can come in and help to project that as well.
I add a fourth one to that, which is kind of when development comes into the conversation as well, because obviously the back end platform is as important as the front end when it comes to SEO. And I used that car analogy earlier of, you know, content design is the driver, the SEO is the fuel, but then you've got the under the bonnet, the mechanic. And yeah, if that isn't working as it should be, it can have a massive impact as well.
The car analogy is always such a good one for SEO. We talk about it being a website and you look under the bonnet and if you find any technical SEO issues. Great analogy.
So it's coming up to 1:45, guys. So I think just one more question from me before we maybe open it up to the attendees for any last questions. I wanted to really just talk about the kind of the future and talk specifically about some of the many changes that Google are introducing. And, you know, the search results pages, you know, are changing so quickly. Even, you know, with COVID, we've seen all these weird new features appear very quickly on the search engine results pages. But the biggest of these, and the one that kind of is the most interesting / terrifying, is around what's known as zero-click searches. So to recap for people who haven't come across that term before, this is where you stick what time is it into Google and it tells you the time, and you don't need to go onto that website that someone's lovingly built to tell you the time. But, you know, this is increasingly more common in Google, and knowledge graph results, or what are called featured snippets, where users are given answers from within the search results pages, are very, very common now and growing. Danny, what do you think that means for content designers?
I've kind of always thought it's important to know what your user's seeing rather than what the creator is seeing. It's kind of pointless, you know, looking at your own nice shiny Mac on a desktop screen, typing in the search result and seeing what you see. What's, you know, the person at a bus stop seeing on their, you know, outdated iPhone when they really need to get information. You look at, you know, especially when it comes to current events, type in coronavirus now. I'm looking at my screen, there's top stories, there's local news, there's a map of cases, there's a cases overview. You don't get a search result until you scroll down. And from a content designer's point of view, understanding how the information that you're putting on a page is going to be seen in context in, you know, a search result is essential. You know, whether it's a big term like that or a small term that might, you know, get a chance of being in a kind of quick answers box. If you don't know what kind of at the other end, then you shouldn't really, you know, be in a fit position to be creating it.
So yeah, I think it's a really good point there, especially around like creating content for to be seen in search and featured snippets. And I think that like as an SEO, that's something that I'm really passionate about, is the fact that well, I don't know how I personally feel about like people not clicking through to websites to read more, but it's a fact of Google basically, is that's what is happening, and more of that is going to be happening. So the way that we present content and content designers like design content on the page has to start reflecting the reality of how that content is going to be served up on search engine results. I guess
with the NHS, Jenny, the most obvious and interesting development is around the fact that if you now type in something like epilepsy to Google, NHS content is being served up on directly within the SERPs. And what's the sort of, what does that mean for content design at the NHS?
It's really interesting actually, because that's one of their teams, the content modularization team, Como. They've been working with Google on getting essentially NHS verified health info into these knowledge panels, so above the organic results on Google. And they've also been working with other kind of information providers, so Apple voice assistants, that sort of thing, to get their health info into voice search and wearables as well. So it's a really interesting development. I think that that project in itself has maybe changed their mentality around writing information specifically for search, because me being passionate in things like featured snippets, that was one of my recommendations at the beginning, is to start writing content for search. But that sometimes is a bit, it sounds like it means writing content for search engines, for robots, rather than for users themselves. So I'd say like that wasn't a very popular idea at the beginning, but I think they've seen how in writing this content in a snippetable way, rejigging their content to provide like the most important 1 or 2 sentences first or together, then that content can be like taken slightly out of context, because that's what people are going to be looking for anyway, is a quick answer, even if that quick answer is find out more.
That's the tough thing, you know, you write something, you know, I've just typed in stroke symptoms and it gives me 4 bullet points, but there's more items, you know, there's symptoms that it's not showing in the quick answer box, which is, you know, a situation like that very dangerous. You know, I could write a sentence, have it appear in a quick answer box, but the first word of the sentence after that is but, you know. It's kind of, you know, you put a lot of time and effort into crafting something on a page, for it to be ripped out and taken out of context and you know, condensed by some AI is you know, both frustrating and pretty dangerous too.
It is, and I think it is scary, but I think that because it's happening and going to be happening, like for content designers, what that means is learning, okay, well, where is the cutoff point? How can I write this content which means that people have to read more, or they know that that's not the full answer, or you know, I think there's clever ways of doing it to say one of the symptoms is this, meaning, you know, people know there's more to research as well. And I think that's what the NHS does with, and I think this is a principle of content design, correct me if I'm wrong, but presenting information, so there's the most important information first that 80% of users need to see. And I think it's taking that same principle and applying it to search as well, to search engine results.
Yeah, agree, 100%.
On that excellent point of agreement, with 10 minutes to go, Lisa, is it worth opening up to questions at this stage?
Yeah, if anyone's got any more. We have got one question from Jack, who said agencies often try to push things that work for the private sector onto charity clients. 2 examples being schema markup and AMP, which is an accelerated mobile page. Is that right? Do you have any thoughts on whether there is value for charities in exploring these?
That's really interesting. I think it totally depends on things like time and budget versus opportunity as well. So I'd say out of the 2 of those, schema markup is where I would put my time and effort and money. AMP is still and used to be really important in order to get into kind of Google News results, but unless you're a news publisher publishing things quickly, that's not really necessary. And also Google News has recently announced that AMP is no longer going to be necessary. You just need to have a really fast site. So I wouldn't, I don't think there's much value for charities to think about AMP. I would put that time and effort into making the website faster. Schema markup, though, I think is really exciting, and there's loads of different types of schema markup, but some of them, there are some types of schema markup which not only help, so what it is basically like tagging up information on your page so search engines can understand what it is and more about the context of that page. And there's some types which not only help search engines understand your content, like who you are, what your social profiles are, but there's some which change the way that your information on your site is displayed in search. So there's things like FAQ page schema markup, where you can tag up your subheadings so that they then appear as drop down boxes in search. I don't know if that's something that you've done and implemented, Danny. I've seen it on some of the gov.uk sites.
No, not recently.
I think that's my favorite one at the moment, but there are maybe like 2 or 3 types which can really actually change the way that your content is displayed in search.
I think if you're getting recommendations, it doesn't matter whether they're for commercial good or charitable good or the public good. If they're good recommendations and they contribute positively to the user experience and whatever KPIs you're trying to hit, then they're good. As long as they're implemented correctly and make the user experience better, then I certainly wouldn't discount.
I think I would just maybe ask your agency to explain the benefits better and how much kind of like time and effort it will take to help you make that decision.
There's a great question here from Rachel around, so I suppose content or prioritization of some form or other, which is when you're looking at SEO, how much content does an organization need to start with? Lots of orgs on this call will be low on resource. So can 2 or 3 relevant pages make a difference?
I think so, yes. I think like every little helps in that way. There's actually a much smaller charity that I'm working with at the moment who are like in that situation. They don't have a very high like visibility in search engine results, and what we're focusing on at the beginning in the first couple of months is literally rewriting 5 pages on their site, and that is the first and main recommendation. As I said towards the beginning, content is the most important thing for SEO. Without content, people won't be coming to your site, so there's no point in focusing on, unless there's like a really big issue which means that your website isn't able to be crawled or found in Google, then that is where, for them, I have decided to kind of like focus time and energy is on making them findable for their 5 kind of key topics. So I think you can start out with a few key pages.
Brilliant, thanks Jenny. And we've got a question from Jessie in New York. Can we talk about cannibalization? So blog posts being reposted across multiple sites and the impact that has.
Yes, is that, Danny, you were talking about cannibalization earlier, but that was specifically for one site, I think.
Yeah, and that's more within your own site. I think putting things within your website which mark it out as an authoritative source, so making sure that you've got completed author profiles and that they're linked up to social profiles, LinkedIn, things like that help Google denote what is the definitive source. Plagiarism bots are good, but they're not perfect, so things are always going to slip through the net. But including things on your site, kite marks, industry affiliations, all that kind of stuff. If you can make, they're good for general SEO, but they're specifically good for trying to stop naughty people nicking your stuff.
It's because when you're saying about being the definitive source, like that's really good point. It's like making yourself the most authoritative source is a really good way of doing it. If it's you publishing content in multiple places, like you want to repost on Medium, for example, you can do that, but there's something called a canonical tag, which means that you're telling search engines that one of your 2 pieces of content or one of your 3 pieces of content is the main piece of content. So you can I would post on your main site first, then repost to Medium with linking back to or adding in a canonical tag to say, actually, don't pay any attention to us, have a look at this other site. I think it's from an SEO point of view, I would always make the content on your website the definitive content, because that brings more authority to your site, makes your website stronger as well.
Thanks, Jenny. Should we try and quickly squeeze one in?
Yeah,
One
sure.
more.
I'll put this one to Jenny. There's a question here from Ryan. It's a good one. So it's around the NHS and it's for Jenny. So how do you view the emergence of blogs in the health information sector who are able to dedicate a whole page to a particular keyword search without ever having to worry about the sorts of things that NHS you have to worry about in terms of the IA of that site, the information architecture? So for example, Ryan's given the example here that the NHS will have a page on lung cancer, but a blog who knows that they can't compete with the NHS will dedicate a page to lung cancer in women and men and be rewarded for it in the SERPs at your expense.
Yeah, I think what that is you're saying that, like, so for one main key term, like lung cancer, NHS is the most authoritative source and will rank for that. But where a blog might target lots of like long tail keywords, so lung cancer in women aged,
symptoms, signs,
yeah, like really granular ones.
Yeah.
And I think the answer there is like, because I think SEO has changed a lot recently, and because NHS is the most authoritative health site in Google's eyes, then that lung cancer page will appear for quite a lot of those long tail keywords. So for like lung cancer in men, because it's the most relevant for lung cancer, I think it appears for quite a lot of, will appear for quite a lot of those key terms. I think the answer is, like, for NHS, we wouldn't recommend creating all of this kind of content for all these long tail keywords, but it's less a problem for where they do have content, and it's more a problem for where they don't have content. So where people might be searching for things like alternative medicines and therapies and things that the NHS don't want to talk about, that is where I think there's a slightly dangerous area, because people are going to be researching around a condition, and they're going to be looking in areas where NHS can't be. So it is a really difficult area for them, and I think the purest SEO way of looking at it would be like, write a page just to say that it's not a viable solution. But I think for the NHS, that's not the right answer there. So I think it's just making, for the NHS, I think it's just making their page visible for as many legitimate user concerns as possible, making their website authoritative, and they just can't rank for all of those. Like Danny was saying, it's going to be dangerous to their brand reputation if they start writing things that aren't part of their remit.
Thanks, Jenny. Lisa, it's 11:01.
It is. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.